Welcome, everyone. I'm Anne Dimon, President and CEO of the Wellness Tourism Association, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today from various parts of the world for this in-depth look at the analytics of the 2020 Wellness Travel Consumer Survey. I will be introducing presenters Danny Kessler and Nathaniel Whittingham in just a few moments. We also have Tiffany Johansson, our WTA Member Services Associate, here with us assisting with the webinar and monitoring the Q&A. Right now, I'd like to take a few minutes to tell you about the WTA and the survey we are about to present. The WTA launched in January of 2018 as a not-for-profit incorporated in the US with the mission to create a network of industry stakeholders and partners looking to support the industry, plus to bring standards to the industry for clarity and to help us with its sustainable growth. We now have over 100 members and partners from 22 countries. This 2020 consumer survey follows our 2019 consumer survey, which looked at the wants and needs of wellness travelers, including their must-haves. The complete focus of this survey was to ascertain the motives driving consumers to plan and book a wellness vacation. The survey launched in early April and ran until the end of July. We offered 4 $500 Amazon gift certificates, plus a 3-night program for 2 at the Art of Living Retreat in North Carolina, one of our founding members. We collected responses from close to 4,000 consumers across 48 countries and territories. Just 54% were women, compared to the vast majority identifying as women in the 2019 survey. Danny will explain the methodology of the survey, which was in accordance with academic standards. Please note that there's no chat function enabled during this webinar, and we will have a Q&A at the end. We will be covering a lot of data here today, so if a question pops up during the presentation, please note the slide number in the lower right-hand corner so we can refer to it. Also note that the material contained is protected by copyright law. So if you want to include any parts of the project in projects that you're working on, and we hope you will, you can only legally do so with proper credit to the WTA. Now I'd like to introduce our presenters. WTA member Danny Kessler has a PhD in wellness tourism from Yonsei University in Busan, South Korea. An American who currently lives in Busan, Danny is also a professor at that same university and conducts wellness tourism research for the South Korean government. Danny has worked with us on this 2020 Wellness Travel Survey since the very beginning as part of his PhD in wellness tourism. The author of 2 books, he is also a wellness practitioner trained as a level 1 holistic lifestyle coach by the Czech Institute. Nathaniel Whittingham has a Master of Science in Applied Economics from the University of Guelph in Canada. Upon graduation, Nathaniel worked with renowned psychologist and best-selling author Professor Dan Ariely of Duke University, consulting Fortune 500 companies, governments, and NGOs on the principles of behavior psychology and human motivation. Currently, Nathaniel works as a data scientist at a tech startup in Toronto where he develops statistical models, machine learning, and AI for product development. And now, on to the presentation. Danny, over to you.
Brief and wrap up the key points, and then we're going to follow up with a Q&A. So next slide, please. Thank you. So this survey, it was based on, the methodology was based on academic principles and academic literature, as well as corroborated with industry data and industry expertise. And in doing that, we found 7 themes relating to wellness travel motivation. Next slide, please. Movement and fitness. Next slide. Next slide, please. Healthy food and diet, meditation and mindfulness. Next slide. Rest and relaxation. Next slide, please. Nate, next slide, please. And now learning about wellness, self-care, and the last one is nature and disconnect. Okay, next slide, please. And each of these 7 motivational themes had 4 questions for a total of 28 possible motivations. For example, the theme of nature and disconnect, we had 4 questions associated with it: to experience activities outdoors, to connect with nature, to feel grounded in nature, to totally disconnect from technology. And we used a Likert scale ranging from 1 to 7, 1 being not important at all, and 7 being most important. So remember that number 7 when you're looking at the numbers throughout the survey. 7 means the item was most important. Next slide, please. So here are the survey results, and Nate will present this part here.
All right, great. So I'm going to take over from here. So I'm just going to walk us through just some of the results we got from this survey. So before I go into the specific motivations and what we saw, I'm going to go over just a quick, just some of the demographics of the respondents that we got. So as Anne mentioned, we had just under about 4,000 participants respond, and we wanted to give an overview of who these respondents were, where they came from, their gender, education, region, age, income. And as we start to break down the motivations, we'll be able to break them down specifically by the demographics to get a look at who is more motivated towards what, and also who is more likely to take wellness vacations. So first off, we found about 54% of respondents were female. So as mentioned, this is a much more balanced survey than we have typically got in the past. Usually many of our surveys and our respondents were more highly female. So in this case, we got a better balance between men and women. Overall, we found about 2/3 declared they had either a bachelor's degree or higher in terms of education. And for the most part, 85% of our respondents were from the US. So mostly an American survey. Of those who were not from the US, 8% were from Canada, and the rest were scattered around the world and internationally. In terms of the age, the vast majority of our participants identified between the 26 to 74 age group, falling into the generational cohorts of millennials, Gen X, and boomers. For the purpose of these results, we're just going to show those 3 age groups. We're going to leave the Gen Zs and the silents out for now. And then relative to income, we found 40% declared under $75,000 of yearly income, 35% between 75 to 150,000, and then just around 10% over 150,000, and then about 14% declined to comment. So that is just the general demographics of the survey. So I'm going to get into the motivations. So just to kind of go over what Danny said, there were 28 questions, and of the 28 questions, they were meant to get an overview of 7 specific themes. So each of the 7 themes had 4 questions related to it. And the first purpose was to figure out what themes are most important for individuals when they are considering a wellness vacation. And that is the first group of data we're going to show here. So I'll quickly explain. The data throughout this presentation will be mostly in this form. So I'll give an overview of just how to read this graph and what to make of the numbers. So from left to right, what we'll see is the 7 themes that Danny quickly went over. So meditation and mindfulness, learning about wellness, healthy food, self-care, movement and fitness, nature and disconnect, and rest and relaxation. So if you note the top 3 motivational themes that we found, and this seems to be the trend throughout, no matter how we break it down by age, income, gender, education, rest and relaxation was by far the top theme. Nature and disconnect was number 2. And then movement and fitness and self-care kind of traded places at 3 and 4. So the numbers on the y-axis, this 5.61 that you're seeing, so we asked participants on a series of statements, how important is this to you between 1 and 7? And we took the average across the 4 questions for all the participants to give that theme a specific number. What did those motivational statements look like? So for example, of the 28 questions we asked participants, these were the 5 questions that had the highest average number of individuals who said these were the most important. So the most important specific motivational statements. Number 1 was to return to life feeling rejuvenated, which had an average score of about 6.1. Number 2 was to escape the demands of everyday life. So right off the bat, one of the first things I noticed, rest and relaxation, as we see, is the most popular theme. These 2 questions really appeal to people. That is really what they stated, that they wanted out of their wellness vacation. They wanted that feeling of coming back after and just being renewed, getting away from the everyday life. Number 3 was to look and feel better. So that question was part of our movement and fitness theme. And then 4 and 5 were both highly rated questions under our nature and disconnect. So these were to experience activities outdoors and to connect with nature. So these are just the overall themes that we found across all nearly 4,000 participants we found. But the next question we wanted to ask was, okay, do these differ between any of the demographics that we have mentioned? So the next series of slides, I'll just walk you through how these broke down by the specific demographics, and I'll point out the kind of the more common patterns that we saw. So the first way we decided to break down this data was to look at it by gender. So if you look at this graph here, the green bars are respondents identified as female, and the orange bars are respondents identified as male. And the first thing that, at least that I noticed, is that the actual priorities or how participants ranked their themes as importance did not differ between men and women. However, what you can kind of clearly see, and which was very statistically significant, was that women generally rated their motivations much higher than men. In fact, it was almost about a half a point on the Likert scale, which is a pretty reasonable amount. So on average, women's motivation was about a 5.2 versus about a 4.7 for men. Now, as I mentioned, the actual top rated questions, number 1 and 2 were identical between men and women. So to return to everyday life, feeling rejuvenated, rest and relaxation, and to escape the demands of everyday life. The only 2 that we really saw switch was that third statement. Men typically were a little bit more, they prioritized more to experience activities outdoors, whereas we found that women had a slightly higher priority to say they want to look and feel better. So a slightly higher priority towards that movement and fitness category. Next, we wanted to break down by income. So for simplicity, we actually asked quite a few different income brackets. But what we found was the most simplest way to show this was just lower income, so under 75,000 versus the higher income, over 75,000. And the reason we wanted to do this breakdown is our initial hypothesis was that individuals with a slightly higher income are probably more likely to be taking more vacations, more wellness vacations, and this might be an audience that we might want to be more targeted to. So if we see that higher income people are prioritizing or more motivated by specific themes, this could be a good indication of where this typical group is. Now, what we saw overall was kind of a similar pattern where we found rest and relaxation was still that number 1 theme. Nature and disconnect was number 2, whereas movement and fitness was number 3. Now, one thing you might note is those green bars, which are the lower income people, are slightly higher. And we actually found this to be slightly significant in the data, whereas the average score for the low income earners was about 5.15, for the higher earners, 4.93. Now, even though this may seem like the lower incomes earners are slightly more motivated, we actually asked another question at the beginning, and we asked our participants, are you currently planning a wellness vacation? And what we found was that 20% of the higher earners actually said they were currently in the process of planning a wellness vacation versus only about 18% of the lower earners. So what we're finding is that our intuition is kind of true here, is that people who are higher earners are definitely more likely to be planning their vacations for wellness. In terms of the specific motivational statements, again, the same pattern we've seen. returning to life feeling rejuvenated, escaping the demands of everyday life were consistent here. Next, we decided to break this down by generation. So as mentioned, we wanted to compare the millennials, Generation X, and the boomers. And this is where we kind of start to see some divergence in the data, where the same priorities, the same motivational rankings are actually a little bit switched. This data is a little bit messy to see. It's kind of all over the place. So I'm going to break this down a little bit clearer and kind of really drill home what we've seen out of this and how the generations are slightly different. The first thing I want to point out is when it comes to that question, who is currently planning a wellness vacation, we saw a very clear divergence between the younger generation, the millennials, and the older generation, the baby boomers. It seems to be that the younger the population are much more likely to state that they are currently in the process of planning a wellness vacation. 36% of millennials surveyed said they were, versus only about 18% of the baby boomers. This is pretty noticeable to discuss. There's kind of a couple ways you can interpret this. It's possible that there could be, an age correlation where younger people are more likely to take a wellness vacation. That's perhaps one way. Another way could be that this is, a trend. This is up and coming. Younger people are starting to realize that this is what they value. They're taking their vacations for more of a purpose of wellness. And that's a good sign for the future that the younger generation seems to be really embracing this concept. And when it comes to what they're prioritizing, this is kind of where I'm going to get to next. How the millennials really differ from the older generations and what they care about on their vacations. So the main takeaway for this is we're still seeing rest and relaxation, and we're still seeing nature and disconnect as the top two. That hasn't changed. But surprisingly, within the millennials, we're finding that healthy food actually ranked as their lowest motivation. And we found that movement and fitness was a much lower priority for them compared to how the Generation X and the boomers and the older generation valued the movement and fitness. Now, in reverse, we found that meditation and mindfulness, which was typically a lower priority, was a much higher priority. I believe it was number 4 for millennials, but which was slightly higher than Generation X and boomers, who had that much lower in their list of priorities. Now, I guess a big question is why? I guess my initial intuition was that, millennials typically, healthy food and movement and fitness being a lower priority was very surprising to me. So my initial hypothesis of why this might be the case is that for younger generations, healthy food, movement is just kind of part of their day-to-day. When they go on vacation, that's just what they kind of expect. That's what they assume as part of it. And they're not seeking that as they disconnect or as they travel or as they move around. That's just kind of an expectation. And what they're really looking for is something like meditation and mindfulness, because that's something new, that's interesting. That's what they're going to learn. So that's kind of how I'm making sense of it. If anyone has anything to add or has perhaps another hypothesis to why this could be the case, that would be a great discussion for the Q&A that we could chat a bit more about. But overall, we found that time in nature, rest and relaxation was still that common denominator between all 3 generations. All right. So next, as kind of a natural segue, we've been breaking down a lot of these cohorts by, are you currently planning a wellness vacation? So we just wanted to show that, that data straight up. And what we found is there aren't too many surprises here. There isn't really any difference between those who are taking a wellness vacation versus those who are not. Those bars are almost the same, and statistically, it's actually identical. The only difference I'm noticing, I'm going to point this out here, is if you take a look at the meditation and mindfulness, this was the only difference that actually was statistically significant. What we found was that it's slight, it's small, but for those actually saying they were in the middle of planning a vacation, they did rank meditation and mindfulness as their number 4. That's something noteworthy to kind of take into account, that this is, for those planning, this is more of a priority, and whether that's more of an age thing it's kind of to be determined with future research and whether this is kind of an up and coming trend that we'll see more of in the future. Now, the last slide I'm going to cover before I pass this back to Danny and we move on to more some of the open-ended questions. We're just trying to ask, do these motivations differ based on specific geographic regions of the world? The short answer is mostly no. Between non-US and US respondents, pretty much all the themes and the motivations were the same. The only difference we noted was you can see the bar movement and fitness with a little star on top. We did see is that participants or respondents in other regions outside the US ranked movement and fitness just slightly higher than their American counterparts. On that note, I think Danny, are you ready to jump in here?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Nate. That was wonderful so far. What I want to add here is that one of my graduate students, Connor, is working with me on the same survey using the same motivational items, testing the motivations of the European population. So I think next year in the spring, we should be able to compare the data between the North American population and the European population using these same motivational variables. So I'm looking forward to doing that next. Next slide, please. So as we all know, with the COVID-19 affecting all of our lives today, when we were creating the survey, we added this question, an open-ended question, which was, as a result of COVID-19 affecting your life, what are some new motivations for going on a wellness vacation not mentioned in the previous questions? And this was very interesting, the results. Next slide, please. In the answers to the questions we had, I think it was over 2,400 responses, over 70,000 words were read and analyzed, and there were 7 themes emerged. The first theme, the most, and these themes are in the order of most importance. The first one was to be proactive. I think we're seeing this theme as there is a real fear of getting sick, and people want to know how to stay healthy and maintain and boost their immunity. And this was a common theme that people were saying and writing about. Second one was similar to the first theme, and it was about resetting and reevaluating priorities, deep introspection into your life. And the third theme that we found was to simply get away. I think people had that cabin fever, being stuck with family members. They wanted to get away and go somewhere. And the fourth one was YOLO, or you only live once. People had this desire they described as just kind of enjoying their life while they still had it. And then there was a theme of mental health. And this theme, I think, is becoming more popular these days as people are becoming aware of their mental health, but people were writing about this quite a bit. And then the next theme was social connection. Now this theme, it's not really something when you look at the academic research about wellness tourists, social connection is not really something they seek. Typically in a wellness tourism experience, they're usually solo travelers. But in this case, I think being isolated or being stuck with their family members, they really were talking about meeting like-minded people. And nature, even though it was an original theme from our research, nature was something that people talked about a lot. And of course, there's one other, not a theme, not a motivational theme, but safety and trust were mentioned quite a bit in the writing of the open-ended question. Next slide, please. So as you can see from these comments, number 3, to connect with like-minded people and get away from my family. So some people, I guess, wanted to get away from their families. And I'm not gonna read all these comments, but I just wanna show them. And some of them had multiple themes. in one comment. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So in the next one, nature, number 2, to get out in nature, breathe fresh air, walk or hike in the woods, enjoy time with a nice group of people. Nature and social connection was apparent in that statement. Next slide, please. And then we have proactive, which I mentioned a little earlier. And if you look at the last one, the 4th one, COVID isolation generates more introspective self-consideration that leads to thoughts of bettering my own life equals thoughts of better diet and exercise. So this was common where proactive and prioritize were in a similar paragraph in a similar sentence. And this was a common theme throughout. Well, we actually broke this down by generations. So we had the 3 main generations, the millennials, the Generation X and the baby boomers, and this was all a top theme for all 3 of those generations. Next slide, please. And then prioritize, as you can see from the writing, it speaks for itself. And next slide, please. Mental health. And next slide, please. And of course, safety and trust. This is something that I think we're all talking about, how we can make our destination safer, how we can communicate safety, how we can build trust with the consumers and being able, because people are worried, if you look at number 3, ensuring that I do not bring illness to loved ones once I return. So people want to travel, but they're just concerned that they're gonna have some problem when they return. So this was an issue that was mentioned throughout all of the writing in this open-ended question. And next slide, please. So next, I want to talk about the preferred information sources. There was nothing really surprising here. Overall, internet search, friends and family, email newsletter that they subscribe to, and special interest brochure were the top 4. For men, the only difference was they're more interested in the brochure, the special interest brochure, and for women, they're more preference for the email newsletter. And then we broke it down by generation. Next slide, please. And the millennials, as you can imagine, as you can guess, social media was the first choice for the millennials. And with Generation X, the special interest brochure was more appropriate. And then for the baby boomers, they mentioned the general brochure, but the special interest travel agent. So it was a little different, but nothing really surprising in these questions. Next slide, please. So the takeaways from this survey. First takeaway is more men took the survey than the 2019 WTA survey. I think if I can remember correctly from the data from Anne, if you want to jump in, it was 82% of women or something like that was in the previous year's survey.
Yes, it was definitely overwhelmingly women, about 80-something%, yes.
So this had a much more even amount, so that was very interesting. The next was rest and relaxation, although this is not really surprising to academics, was the most prominent motivational theme for, it's probably not that surprising, but it was in all categories that, as Nate mentioned, as the most important theme. And then the return to return feeling rejuvenated was the most highly rated motivational statement. So the language there, the word rejuvenated, I saw that word so many times as I was analyzing the data from initially creating the themes. Rejuvenated is a very powerful word. And millennials are the generational group most likely to be planning a wellness vacation. And this could be a number of things. I know Nate had an interesting point about that when he was discussing their planning for the mindfulness and meditation. And I wonder it's also just a purely age thing. You know, young people, our generation, the millennials, we're not getting married as quickly. We're not having children. So we have the disposable income to travel and plan something or think towards the future about some vacation. And number 5, the desire to spend time in nature continues to be a prominent theme. Next slide, please. So the desire to spend time in nature is the common motivational denominator across all the generations. A proactive attitude is expected to prevail post-COVID as people are more concerned with their health and boosting immunity. And I actually wrote about this in my dissertation about that proactive attitude. People are really becoming aware of how important wellness is because of the results of COVID-19. People don't want to get sick. People are stuck at home. They're searching on the internet. They're learning a lot. They're forced to learn, and people are changing their attitudes about health and wellness. And next, social connection has become a more important focus to the wellness traveler, and it might become a trend post-pandemic. Let's see. And lastly, as I mentioned in a few slides before, safety and trust are major concerns with travelers going forward, and I think we all know that. All right, next slide. So I guess now this is our contact information. So if you have any questions for us personally, then you can contact us this way. And I guess we'll start up with the Q&A.
Sure. Okay, I think we can do that. Danny, here's a question for you. What's the difference between proactive and prioritize? What's the difference that you see?
So they were often coupled in the same open-ended answers. And I would say that proactive people, the people that mentioned proactive, they were just looking to either, improve their knowledge. They were looking to get right at it, learn some yoga, learn something new, boost their immunity. Boosting their immunity was like the number one thing they said, I would say. They were just talking about how they want to avoid getting sick, boost their immunity, either learn something or relearn something that they used to know. Whereas the prioritize was more about, it was more related to them having this deep introspection about their life, a total reevaluation of their life. Like I'm overweight. I have to do something about this. I realized that I have to change my life. And it was different. It was oftentimes coupled together with proactive, but it was a separate category, according to my analysis.
Nate, do you have anything to add to that?
Honestly, I think Danny summed that up very well.
Okay.
That was exactly what was going on in my head.
Okay. A fellow member and someone who's also done surveys with us, Lazo Puxo, said we should really, he'd like to know a little bit more about the further evaluate the millennials' responses. Yes. With healthy eating particular. Danny, I think that Nate gave us his impression on that, but you're a millennial as well. So what do you think about that? Millennials saying that the healthy food as a motivator was lower than, say, mindfulness and meditation. What's your take on that?
Well, I have to agree with Nate in the general sense, his hypothesis. And I'm thinking of, I can't help but think of my own life and all the things that I was exposed to with social media and being educated from social media about food. And to me, food is just something so obvious. And I think Nate would agree. We know how to eat healthy because it's just part of our information diet. We're constantly, if you're into health and wellness, we have people that we are following on social media, podcasts, diet experts that are telling us. So when we go on vacation, we're not, of course we want food, but we already eat very healthy. And we know to shop organic food, and we know what we're doing in order to eat healthy. So we expect it, but it's not necessarily a motivation for us to go somewhere to eat healthy. If you look in my refrigerator and in my cabinet, you're only going to find healthy food because that's what I eat. So when I go on vacation, I'm not even going to mention that. So that might be what Nate said. I happen to
Sure.
agree.
Yeah.
It's,
very
it's
much.
already part of the lifestyle, so it's not necessarily a motivator.
Exactly.
Here's another question. What was the idea behind including the respondents who earned an income of less than 75,000 if they are low in probability to take a wellness vacation?
Yeah, I can plug away that. So for the most part, we want to include everyone in the survey. We don't want to be eliminating any participants, but we do want to kind of give a breakdown of who's more likely and less likely. And it isn't to say that people with less than 75,000 are low probability, but they're lower in probability relative to the higher incomes. So if you wanted to do that would be one interesting way to break down the data is, there's a million different ways to look at the data. I think it was, one second, let me just pull up the slide. We specifically broke it down by, this one here. We specifically broke it down by those who said they are currently planning a wellness vacation. And what we found was that the trends and the motivations weren't very different than those who weren't seeking a wellness vacation. So that's why it just made sense to put everything together. Because just because you're not planning one currently doesn't mean you won't necessarily be taking one in the future. If there's anything to add, or if you have any follow-up questions, just throw that in the chat.
The follow-up question to that was, are there more people in that bracket wanting to take a wellness vacation now? I can respond to that. In our first survey, I do not recall that we added a question on income, but we will be able to tell that in the future, because once we do our next survey next year and add the income, if we ask this question again, we'll be able to compare the 2020 with the 2021 survey and see whether or not there are more people in the lower income bracket looking to take a wellness vacation. Did one of you want to add to that?
We do have some data on that 10%, but we don't have it organized up on this slide deck. So I think if you were to email one of us, we could probably share some more information about the people making over $150,000 a year, which made up 10% of the survey respondents. We just don't have it. There was no data. There was no significant data there, but we can give you some of those results if you email one of us about that.
Okay. One of our travel agent members is asking is suggesting that for the millennial response, it's also possible that diet culture has been exposed for negative messaging. So the millennial population, she says she's part of that. We want to focus on more positive things outside of food and body. That's another really good explanation for that.
Yeah,
Sure. That's an interesting point.
One of the things that I find, I think is kind of a love-hate with research is you always ask a question in your research, and then you get an answer, and then you get another question. And this is one of those cases where you look at this and you're like, why is the millennial so low on healthy eating? And that just leads to a lot more questions to break that down further and really try to understand, why was that so low? But that's a great possibility as well.
I must mention that in our 2019 consumer survey, we asked a question, what is your top must-have? And it's interesting that healthy food options was the #1 must-have right across the board. But we didn't break that down into geographical cohorts. So that was just the #1 across the board. Someone is asking to explain slide 25.
Yeah.
Can you flip over to, oh, there we go.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly reevaluate what that is. So we asked participants, true or false, or yes or no, are you currently planning a wellness vacation? So we broke that down. The green bars are those who said, yes, I am currently planning a wellness vacation at the time of filling out the survey. And the red bars are those who said, no, I am not currently planning a wellness vacation.
Okay, thank you. Another question. So travel experiences where vegan or plant-based menus are available is not a factor that should be promoted by travel advisors? That's a question. I have a response to that, but you guys go ahead. She's asking if those type of things should be promoted if you're a travel agent with products to sell.
We didn't get into any specific, we tried to make the questions broad enough and not pick certain diets, because if you follow the different diets, there's like a diet, almost like a, what is the correct diet to have? And we didn't want to pick one, and then people might be very turned off by one diet and then turned on by another diet. So we just asked a question about, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was related to just, do you want to eat, had clean eating? We used the phrase clean eating. So whatever clean eating meant to you, that's how we asked that question. We didn't want to get into any specific diets, because then it gets complicated with the responses.
Okay.
It would become very polarized responses, I think.
My response to that question is, while healthy food options may not be a motivation for the millennial group, it's certainly a great offering. It's certainly an amenity, because if they are in fact already eating a healthy lifestyle, they certainly want to know that that is available to them on that particular trip. So I would say, do not stop promoting healthy food options. It may not be the motivator, but is still very much in demand. Would you guys agree?
I would agree with that. Yeah, it might not be what's getting them to book the vacation, but once they're there, it could be an expectation that it's available.
Right.
Yeah. Anything else? I don't have any other questions here. Is there something else that you guys feel that, you'd like to bring to the table here?
Yeah, I'm just looking at a couple of the questions in the Q&A. I see one that asked why Canadians were only represented at 8%. I think maybe Anne, you can speak to that.
Well, I really don't have a good response for that. It was promoted in Canada as much as it was in the US. So I do not know the reason for that. We had a lot more participation from Canadians in our 2019 survey. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I know that as a Canadian, I know that Canadians certainly would have appreciated the $500 US Amazon gift card. But I don't know why we didn't have as high a representation from Canadians in this particular survey. Any other questions for Danny and Nathaniel? No?
I see one that's just kind of asking for each of ours overall takeaways. That'd be a great question to kind of wrap things up.
Okay, go
If
ahead.
there's no other questions.
Danny, take it away.
Okay. I was very interested. I'm really fascinated with that last open-ended question, as you can see as I was talking about it. How the average Joe, the average person, maybe pre-COVID, pre-COVID, they don't have any, they think, oh, I'm going to go to the gym, or I should join the gym. And then after this COVID-19, or during this COVID-19, how that average Joe is changing his mind, or whoever I'm talking about. The people who are not really, the average person who's not really into health and wellness, like probably all of us here watching this or participating in this, how are they changing their thinking after COVID-19, and how much is wellness going to grow as a trend because of what we're all facing, and the fear and the education that's out there on the internet, on YouTube, people educating each other simply by watching YouTube videos and learning. So I think that there's quite a trend going on, and I'm really interested once this is all over and travel opens up fully, how much there's going to be a much bigger interest. I have a feeling there's going to be a much bigger interest in wellness travel. I think that most travel will be wellness travel because of what we've all experienced in the last 9 months or so. That's my takeaway.
Yeah, I can go next. I would say kind of what Danny alluded to in his presentation is that word rejuvenated really stood out for me. And it kind of makes sense with the world of COVID. First thing I've noticed is, I get up in the morning and the first thing is my Slack is going off. I'm texting, I'm getting phone calls, I'm getting emails, I have WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger. I'm constantly being digged. I lose that separation between work and life. And I think through this, what I've really seen is that, vacation, in some part, it's sightseeing, it's exploration, but so much is just disconnecting and just getting away from those stresses. And in the past, maybe people would take a cruise or go to a resort, but I think it's really changing that people just want to get away, disconnect, and find a way to really feel kind of back to themselves, and just get away from those stresses of life. And this seems to be kind of that new mode that's being built specifically around achieving those goals.
I think my major takeaway is that, first of all, we had many more consumers respond to this survey than our 2019 survey, even though we offered the same type of cash prize for anyone who took the survey. But I really do believe, as Danny and Nathaniel have already said, that there is going to be a much more of a priority on our own health and wellness, not only at home when we travel, and that can only bode well for the wellness tourism industry. So I'm very optimistic. I'm staying positive that the industry is going to continue to rebound and stronger than ever. Anything else from either of you guys before we wrap up? Nope. Well, I want to thank you both very much. I know how hard you've worked. This has been a lot of work putting all this data together, and we greatly appreciate it. We hope you, our audience, found it interesting and are able to take some points away with you and help you in your business. If you have any questions about the webinar, please contact one of us about the survey, about the webinar, about the WTA. Please feel free to reach out. In the meantime, stay well, stay safe, and wishing you all a very good weekend. Thank you for joining us today.